Well, welcome everybody. Kick off this meeting. Let's do a quick around the. I'm so excited to be in a room with people. So let's start with maybe a roll call here in the room, and then we can go to the screen. But we just want to start.
Tiffany Reeves, Workforce Services Manager.
Lynn Bloom, Citizen Rep, for Finance Committee with DOD.
Mike Riley, HR Director.
Annie Glasgow, Workforce Director.
Matt Montgomery, Treasurer.
Colin Mosley, Leola Work Accounting Officer.
David Dellinger, Bluegrass Ed.
Kelly Rowe, Executive Board Staff Assistant.
Robin Richmond, Workforce Administrative Assistant.
Michael Bushman, CFO.
I'll go clockwise on how I see them. So Stacy.
Stacy May, Planning and Information Manager.
And Micah.
Micah Drake, Secretary.
Jennifer.
Jennifer Hayes, Project Director for the Direct Service Provider.
Michelle.
Michelle Dean, MCM CPAs.
Okay, and Dolly. And you're on mute, Dolly.
Push the wrong button.
Oh,
Dolly Holland, Vice Chair.
Thank you. It wouldn't be a meeting if somebody wasn't on mute, so thank you for that. Let's take a look at the minutes from the last meeting, if there's any questions or a motion to approve those minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Ethan. Is there a second or any conversation? Sorry, who was that?
I said I would say Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle. Any conversation? All in favor, raise your hand or say aye. All right. Approved meeting or approved. So next, let's go into our probably our topic du jour of the WIO funds and our status. And if you have a process you want to take us through there, or I just had a series of questions we can kind of go through.
I can kind of, was hoping to maybe address most of your questions during the explanation. And then if you have any follow-ups that I missed maybe on this list of items. But really, I just want to, first of all, explain the situation, how I think we got there, what I think, with the corrective action that we've taken, and then basically our, moving forward, how do we prevent something like this from happening? Is that mouse working?
Yes. I think you will need to share the screen for other people to see it. No, she was not.
So, can I overlook?
Yeah.
We'll just be in this view here.
And so we can see it here. Michelle or someone can, or is it being shared? Can you see it? The Excel spreadsheet on the screen?
No.
She said no. Yeah, so you guys need to flip back over into Zoom and share.
Yeah, that's fine.
I would suggest sharing the whole screen so that if you flip between spreadsheets, you'll get it.
Now we can see your screen. It's the Google Chrome.
It's all boxed in.
but it dropped down and opened it in Excel, so. Put a little arrow on the attachment.
Maybe go to the next.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
There you go.
Thank you. So basically, around October, November, we had a few draws. We were delayed in draws. And we had a large one that basically it was difficult to kind of decipher where the funds were coming from. That was kind of our first inkling, October of 2022, that perhaps the budget was incorrect. So to kind of explain, historically, the workforce accountant was responsible for budgeting and reporting, and really all the information was just passed along to the CFO. So for basically anytime the budget was updated, you know, again, that was given to the CFO to update our internal accounting system. So my best estimation is basically from FY21, we did not adjust for our carryover into FY22. So we did not adjust our budget down for our current allocations. So right there, that shows our budget was overstated. Number two, new FY22 allocations were not correctly put into SIMA. So there's nothing when Tracy would run reports or if I would run reports that would red flag that you're over budget, that these grants are over. So that internally, that's a big glaring internal weakness. So that's the biggest thing that, you know, we found going forward. So basically, there was also no effective way to review what was being reported in the work system, which is the state reporting system. Unless you had the same login, there was no way to know what was being reported. And on the state side, they did not have a cumulative report to run to show what was reported for a month.
And maybe if we could just for a minute, let me back up and go a little bit higher level, because I think we're getting into the weeds here, which is
Sure.
where we want to go, but let's stay a little higher level. I mean, so my questions here, because we're going to go down very, very different paths depending on the answer to especially this first question, were any funds not WEO funds or things that we would be reimbursed for or things
No.
outside the law?
There was no misuse of funds, other than, you know, we use more adult money than we had allotted to us for FY22. We did not overuse all of our funds. If you look at a total, we had enough funds to pay for everything what happened in FY22. We just did not, number one, correctly budget those.
And as not an accountant, I just
Sure.
want to make sure that FY22 is this fiscal season, correct? That you're
Prior
referring-
year. So that's from July 1 of 2021 through June 30 of 2022.
Okay, and then so this is fiscal year 23?
Correct,
We
that we're
start
currently
with
in.
July 1st, 22, taking us through June 30th.
Correct. And this right here, this exact grant kind of shows, this was our last available grant, this 2738022. This was our last available grant for the fiscal year 22, so ending June 30 of 2022. So as you can see, we rolled all the adult expenses that we incurred and put them down here, and we were over by 533,000. So that was the first problem with FY22. We did have a call with the state on Monday where, you know, we've been in contact with them for a couple weeks now and have explained everything. I've gone to Frankfurt a couple times now. We've kind of walked through how they can review, how they should review. Because personally, if I was on the state side, I would not have approved some of our draws that we had. I personally don't think there was enough documentation. There wasn't enough proof to show that what we're reporting matched with what we accounted for. And that's something on the state side too. I think they're going to start implementing moving forward. For instance, they're going to now require an income statement from our internal accounting system as proof as to what we're drawing each month. They will also now have a report that will run on the state system, so I can see if, for instance, Colin, when he's reporting each month, I can now run and make sure that matches with what our income statement and our grant reports say each month. And I can make sure that matches with our receivable that we book internally. Those are some steps that we can now use to make sure that the state matches. And I'm sure most of you that have been on the board or the finance committee, like you recognize the spreadsheet. This is like basically our only way that we used to track it. This is how I did my job prior as a workforce accountant. And this wasn't being done, for the past year. But again, going back to this transfer specifically, I think FY '22 is okay. We did get the okay to transfer, so I'm gonna move some of these funds to this grant here, 272, BGWIB 368,000 of that. And then 171,000 up to this grant, 271 BW21. We did submit those transfers Monday. Again, I don't wanna say for sure until I get something in writing that says everything's okay, but the state did give indication that they would approve those transfers. What I had to do, because our draws did not match throughout the year, I had to make an applicable credit, which is basically just moving expenses on the draw forms. There's really 3 separate entity reporting sides that kind of coincide. That's why the spreadsheet was so important, because I could tie my draw forms to the work system and to our accounting system. That's why this was so important here. But that's kind of where we are right now. So rolling forward to FY '23.
Just to be clear, I mean, so we've said that everything that we have spent is acceptable. It's just that we overspent much more aggressively than we would have in the past.
Correct. But the problem with that is because carryover was not accurately monitored from FY '21, the budget that was given in FY '22 was probably to Equus was overstated. So there's nothing on their side, that's not their fault. They were given a budget that, 3.9 million, for instance, that they could spend, when in reality, we probably should have limited that to 3.5. So they're spending at an inflated rate that we shouldn't have given them, so our carryover is much less.
Right, but the difference is, nobody's going to jail for this.
Correct, yes.
Right, so I just, let's establish that baseline.
Yes.
You didn't end up in a vacation house, or anybody here, right? I mean, we're not, so I think that's important to kind of understand. Then I think about the reporting, I want to get into that, but I wanted to establish that.
Yes, right off the bat, there are no unallowed costs right now. Because we started seeing this early on, November-ish, I think Amy and I first had talks like, kind of what I was seeing. The problem, and this is my frustration, is we didn't have accurate starting numbers for our budgets. I didn't have anything internally in SIMA that matched, and also the state system wasn't correct either with what we actually were approved. So I had to work with the state for months, and then also basically rebuild our last 2 fiscal years to make sure I could kind of track what happened. But I kind of see the writing on the wall pretty early on that we were much further along than we thought. So I initially told Amy, she immediately took action, told Equus, that, hey, we need to stop enrollments. I think we're a little over. Because honestly, that saved us. Like, if we didn't take action then, we would have been, the way we were spending, which is great, but we would have been out of funds completely, and then we would have been in trouble and been paying with our investment accounts.
Is the state still using the work system?
They are.
So you and I attended a couple meetings before I.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that system is a mess anyway. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming they haven't updated or changed anything.
Correct, and that's part of the issue, because the only thing I had to go off of was the numbers that I was given, and then what the work system said. Now, the work system was wrong. The work system didn't have the correct balances
Has been
for their budgets, yeah, so, but that's something that I met with the state, and we've kind of gone over and we corrected, I believe. We've gotten all the NFAs, and they now match, my spreadsheet matches the work system. The work system now matches the totals of NFAs, so I think we're actually on track and we actually know where our money is.
But I mean, and I think you've already answered these questions, but it wasn't like years ago we had trouble where we wanted money in adult and they wouldn't let us have it because we couldn't move it from here or vice versa. Right?
Correct.
Dislocated. That's not the problem.
No.
An administration change.
Right. Well, yeah. But I'm just saying that's not the problem.
Yeah.
There wasn't a grant that we thought would come in that we were spending against that didn't come in. It
Right.
truly was, there was an amount that we just weren't able to represent as.
Correct. Correct.
All right.
So did we start with not accurately tracking where we were on the budget, or I'm sorry, on spending to our grants, and then our carry forward amount was wrong, therefore we gave our vendor the wrong budget? I mean, is that?
Correct. Yeah, so it really does start with the carryover. So when fiscal year 21 was closed, what should have happened was we should have gone into our, we use accounting system SIMA. We should have reduced our grant budgets down to what the carryover amount was, what the remaining balance was for each grant. That didn't happen. And then when the budget was established, basically they just took the total amounts. And then basically what was given, because again, the amount of money we have is supposed to operate both us internally and Equus. And so I think for 2 years in a row now, you'll see, for instance, here's our total funding that we had for FY23, so July 1st of 2022, we had 4.1 million total funding, but Equus's budget, for instance, was 3.9 million. So, there's nothing on their end to flag, hey, we're not over budget. And then there was nothing on our end internally with our accounting system because our budget was so high as well. So it didn't look like we were overspent. It looked like we had plenty of funds left because it, again, wasn't tracked internally.
And I'm assuming staff turnover had a lot to do with this during that time frame. If I'm tracking.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. So my best explanation, the more I've sat in this seat, was for a long, long time, we had great people and not so great internal controls. Jacqueline's an amazing accountant. Fantastic, seriously. I just think that, I don't know if it was just because of what had happened. I thought, my thinking is that they thought that because only one person could do a job, that was internal controls. Well, hiding what you do is not internal controls in my opinion. I mean, it shouldn't be a secret what I do. We should have controls in place that ensure that I'm the one that can post, or I'm the only one that can finalize where it hits the GL or something along those lines, permissions and accounting systems. But that wasn't, I guess, the thought. It was just, only this person can do this. Only this person can, that way it can't be screwed up by someone else. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing. So when we had 15 years of experience walk out, and Rebecca with aging, or, I feel like I wasn't amazing by any, but I understood, I just did my job and the workforce accountant. When those people kind of walked out, there wasn't anything in place to ensure that those responsibilities continue to happen.
So there was a period of time, I guess, where you nor Jacqueline were in the building and reporting changed and what they were tracking, the way they were doing business was different.
Correct.
Okay, so I think I understand how we got where we're at.
Right.
Today, I think the conversation is kind of twofold.
Right.
What are we gonna do now to ensure we don't get here again?
Exactly.
And then, what do we look like today and how do we go forward? And I think that's probably a discussion that,
Yeah, and I want to make sure that we frame it and we understand that.
Yes.
As we look at communication, I mean, we've got a board meeting in a week, so.
And you're gonna have to explain all this.
Yeah, so we have to explain all this, right, I mean, so trying to understand what that really means. But I think we'll get into maybe the controls here in a minute, but I think what we said is, because of the carryover, that's the primary driver for this. When we look at number of people served, I mean, the elevator speech seems to be that we didn't do anything that we weren't supposed to do, we just did it we did too much too early in the year.
The sad truth is, the Equus and the third floor did an amazing job at the jobs. They did fantastic. It's just, honestly, the fault kind of lies with the second floor. We didn't have the admin finance department. We didn't have correct budgets. So what we relayed to program staff, to Equus, that was incorrect. So again, in their mind, they're doing all this great work, but again, they're giving bad numbers. But yes, it goes down to, we didn't track our budgets correctly. And that comes from the carryover issue and comes from us not establishing a correct budget.
So that fiscal year changed over, we didn't adjust Simon down.
Mm-hmm.
We were tracking a much higher number than we were supposed to be, so when we reported to the third floor, we being the collective second floor, so. A higher number than what was available, is what it sounds like, and then Equus ran and did their job like they were supposed to do, perform their contract. These folks were still watching policy and things like that, we just overread, basically.
Correct.
Based on that original, deducting the carryover.
And again, I think,
and of course, you can't go in the state system and try to reconcile that because it's also a mess. So
I was just gonna say,
I think there. Okay.
I think that's why they're so cooperative with us right now, is because I think they pretty frank conversations with them, they realized that they weren't doing their job on review as well. They also realized that the work system wasn't correct.
And the reason I ask that is because, I handle a lot of federal dollars now.
Yep.
And those guardrails are in place. I may enter into these agreements at a local level and with contractors and things of that sort, but when I go to physically receive that allotment in my bank account to pay the bills, they're checking to make sure I'm not drawing down what I'm supposed to be, but it sounds like they weren't at the state either.
No.
Okay.
And is there any opportunity, for additional funds from the state?
there would only be if other local areas didn't spend their money and they recapture those funds. As of right now, there's no other local area. A lot of the local areas have stopped services in their areas because they're about the spring is when some areas start, they're about out of funds themselves outside, like, they're not like us where we had to lay off staff. But they can't continue to provide the funded.
And a lot of this too, this is a weird or strange example because we did have extensions for a third year with these funds because of COVID. There was a COVID extension issued, so a lot of those areas that may typically have additional funds that are recaptured now have an additional year to spend those funds.
So they can return.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I remember that. I mean, again, that was just like, hey, if there's more money, but that I think, I've always felt like we had that conversation in May or June, not so much in February, right, as it comes out. Yeah, and then, just from a sanity check, was it significantly higher or lower this year versus last year?
Are you talking about the allocation or
The
the?
allocations?
So that's another problem. So not only do we have less carryover, let me show you here. So this was our allocation total for FY '22, and that's about standard. You know, it's about $4 million here. Again, almost 4 million FY '21. This past year, we're about 400,000 less with 3.6 million. So not only was our carryover less, our new allocation amounts were less. And so again, we had only total funding to operate both sides of 4.1, and we gave them a budget of 3.9.
Okay. So, I mean, 10% off is
Sure.
different, and then it wasn't like a 50%.
No, they're pretty standard year after year.
Okay. And then if we were to talk to this, like, I'm just trying to anticipate talking to the board, I mean, number of people served again, I mean, as you said, like.
At December, we were at like 20 different from what we said last year.
Okay.
But they're just number of
20 more?
20 more than
20
last
more.
20 more, in December, you were 20 more than last year for the entire year, or 20 more than where you were in December?
Where we were in December.
Okay, so we will end up serving less people this
Yeah, because
year.
we won't be able to serve anybody else.
Right, but if part of the story is that we accelerated, we served more people early, and then we ran out of funds, that's not essentially what we're saying. We're saying we just ran out of funds, but we served less people because we didn't have 4.5 months. So it wasn't that it wasn't like we served 500 people last year, and we served 500 people this year, we just did it sooner. We did only like 200
We did
people.
serve sooner. We had a few months where we served sooner, but we had to stop those services. We actually probably, Michael, we brought it up in November, but we probably stopped it a little bit sooner than that as far as enrollment. So by October, November, we had already served, say, 269 people, and that's where we were at in December of last year.
Okay.
But because we haven't enrolled anybody else, we're still at about that same number.
So what's the delta on enrollments? I think that's what Master John, so we can talk to the board next week. Overall, and Jennifer may know, because I know they have to report that for contract reasons, but what was the total number in '22, and what's the total number that we're at right now?
We were about just a little under 600 last year.
Okay.
And this year we're about is that right, Jennifer? About 269, if I remember right?
I can get the exact numbers within just a couple minutes, but we're right around the same point where we were this time last year. So if you compare those years, we're right around the same for now, but we won't end the same because we don't have funds to continue serving.
500 and some odd.
Yeah, it was about 561 or 571.
So if last year we served, I'm just gonna say 600 to make the math easy, I'm gonna say 300 that we will end up serving this year. And we're saying we're out of funds and we're only 10% off. Was the cost of serving somebody this year double what it was last year?
No, we just didn't have the carryover like Michael was talking about. There was a little bit of a difference in that, people's salaries went up. Like last year, it may have been $10 an hour for somebody for an internship, and this year it was $12 an hour. That's a little bit of a difference, but I don't think it was enough.
Most of it was the carryover issue.
Yeah, it's the carryover
It
issue.
really does start
Much to carry into the next fiscal year.
Right. Start from FY '21, from my best estimation, that's where it all kind of trickles from, is that we didn't, we didn't calculate our carryover correctly into assignment. And so what was given for FY '22 was higher than probably what it should have been. And then again, that just carries forward, it's just a little, snowball effect. So we have less carryover, carryover, higher expenditures, because we're enrolling more people than normal, so that was the effect that I can best see what happened.
Did you also say and a reduction in current year funds, so less
A little
carryover
bit,
and,
yeah.
and then a slight reduction in the funds they're giving you this year,
Right.
and then higher costs per hour, per hour that you're paying.
So as a compare, we served more people last year than we should have as well, so it's not that we should.
If we
compare
were
this year
on a
to
strict
last year.
budget, yes,
Right.
I do think that we had a budget that was too high for the funds that we had available.
Yeah, I mean, we served based on the numbers that we had, and had we thought we had, known we had less money,
Right,
obviously
we
we
would've
wouldn't have served
probably-
600 people, yeah.
Right.
Oh,
That 600 people higher than typical? Like, we're comparing this year and last year, but that seems pretty similar.
Yeah,
I
if you
think
go.
it seems like the problem was before that, because that's what made the carry forward go down.
If you look at the numbers from 2017, when EQUIS came into place, every year the numbers have gone up. I think the first year it was 300 in 2017, and then it's just gone up every year from there.
and then, sounds like the state's digging into their system as well and process, I mean, that's good. It sounds like you already said you're working on an audit of last year, right now?
We're still currently doing our audit for FY '22, yes. A lot of that does have to do with this workforce. Really, stuff that we even talked about was the draw side. The draws were honestly a bit of a mess. I mean, there was, the documentation that was maintained, it was just really disappointing. It just wasn't, nothing to explain why we drew what we drew. I do think that, we spent enough time now where I can kind of come through, and what I've kind of talked to the state about doing is quite literally crediting all of our draws and resubmitting up to what it should have been. And I think they're kind of on board with that, because I don't think that they're fully confident in what they've paid out as well.
When you say audit, are you referring to the annual ad audit, or is the
Annual ad audit.
Okay, so we're talking about the calendar.
Yes.
Okay.
And then when is the next audit that would include this year? That's
For the ad,
Yeah,
typically they start field work late October, early November. So I mean,
so it's a while.
it'll be a while.
Monitoring for last year for the workforce started Monday.
Are they still doing that
But
digitally?
they tend to focus more on like case management and travel.
They do,
expense.
but they also look at finances and stuff too. They've asked to pull, payments and time sheets and all that kind of stuff, so.
That's probably more through the allowed or disallowed, and we're not really talking.
Yeah, that is something that we're not worried.
Okay. That's good news.
Yeah.
What's
You don't
the
think a
one-
lawyer
well,
said
no,
next to you.
the one you always find, it cracks me up, is you use the wrong penny amount for the mileage reimbursement. That seems to come up this year for one expense report, so.
Yes.
Okay. All right, you check that box, but, okay. And then, so what does it look like going forward? You get the next allocation for the next fiscal year. Is that, so we'll be able to restart services like at the beginning of July? Is that?
It would be, our allocation, it's technically supposed to come July. But usually we don't get it till end of July, beginning of August. So, and it's a small amount because they expect that you have carryover from the previous year to cover that beginning of the year. And then in October is when the larger amount will come. So we will still be operating very limited.
Before we talk future, what are we doing to make sure, you talked a little bit about reconciling the state. Before we start talking about what we're doing next, what are we doing right now to make sure we're controlling it?
Everything's controlled, right? That was my biggest question, is how does this happen? How do we prevent it from happening?
Well, I think I understand how we got here. It was a kind of a compounding of different factors, but like, what are we doing differently? What are you doing differently?
Right.
What is Colin gonna be doing differently now?
And what
Because
should the
Matt's gonna
board
probably
do?
gonna wanna
Yeah,
tell the board.
what do we need to do as a board?
My biggest complaint, starting off was just, there weren't really true, procedures written down for positions. When I started my first week, the aging accountant walked out, and I had no idea how to do their job. There was nothing to tell me how to do their job. So basically, since I started, the biggest thing that we have now is a master SOP. So we have literally all the manuals written together for each person on the accounting, the second floor's position, what they're required. We now have a standardized checklist, which combines quite literally everything that the second floor produces. It goes from me, it goes from Mary Ann, the administrative assistant. On top of that, everything is linked together, so you can click on the checklist spreadsheet that we cover weekly. We have a weekly meeting that we go over what's due and what's coming up. There's locations where everything's filed. That was another thing too, I mentioned, the documentation, everything. I think people that have worked here know we do everything with paper here. I'm not a big fan of paper. I want things scanned in, I want things saved on a file server that can't be lost. So that was a big initiative that we had. Yeah, so everything is scanned in a location, and a single location, not 12 different locations on the file server. So we've kind of consolidated into one area. So all my staff have one folder now that they go into. They have all their work that they produce. For Colin, for instance, he has his monthly reporting, he has his board reports, he has his trade reports, he has transfers, they're all in the same location. Again, all saved and scanned. But again, my biggest thing is I started doing these instructional videos. So everything I do internally, I have videos where I try to record myself doing it, talking through why I'm doing it, on top of those written instructions. The biggest thing is I shared that checklist with David on all the program directors. So not only just Amy, all the directors, Shane for CP, Celeste with aging, I make sure that they're all aware, hey, this is what your staff should be producing each month. And I think that was something else, is that maybe the communication between the program staff and the financial staff wasn't what it should have been. Yes, they're completely separate entities, but I feel like you should be aware, I should be trained in the program what they're doing. It makes sense behind the numbers. Same thing with program staff coming down and seeing how we're reporting. How does this actually affect my program?
So it sounds like we're keeping the same structure. Colin's not moving upstairs, but it's gonna be more transparent, and you guys are tracking things in a certain way. So like, he's still answering to you, not Amy, and
Correct.
that situation. Okay.
So we now have, again, what he's now, we have, again, it's I keep calling it, it is a checklist, but like each week or each month, he's supposed to produce certain items. We're gonna, for the state, to make sure the work system, for me to approve a draw or a receivable that we book in SIMA, it's gonna match with what the work system says. He's gonna produce a report for that now.
So we're actually tracking draws a little differently and a little bit more.
Right.
More than one set of items.
Correct. Now, obviously, I'm still extremely open to suggestion. I've always asked if there's anything else that, especially, financial staff here, anybody that has suggestions on what would be helpful, because obviously we do have a limited staff. And we do have kind of limitation on controls, obviously, but these are the actions that I've taken to try and, remedy the situation. But if there's anything else that you think would be helpful, I'd love to hear.
No, and these are great, and what I'm driving at is eventually the next audit's gonna come, the next monitoring, the next state looking is gonna come, and you now are actually producing products to hand to them and show them.
Right.
To rectify any issues that they may have due to the current situation.
Right.
All right, Matt, I'm sorry, I'll stop.
That's good.
And the goal is, obviously, we don't want anyone to be irreplaceable. You want, if I were to win the lottery, I don't want to be missed. Like, someone should be able to pick up my job, and anything I do should not be a secret. It should not be held in
Especially
one
now with
location.
public funds, it shouldn't, right?
Yeah, so it should not be a secret what I do or how I do it. That's my biggest thing about any position here. But that's kind of what I'm hoping to get to.
I think that's good. I appreciate you said lottery versus being hit by a bus.
Yeah, well.
That's what I used to say. It's much more optimistic.
Yeah, I like that a lot better. But I also, there's something.
Sorry. On controls, Michael, I would suggest that you and your staff and maybe, the program directors have a little brainstorming meeting and just write down the what could go wrongs. And, we start at the bottom, like what could go wrong besides this, and everything from, misappropriation to mistakes, human error, whatever. List out your what could go wrongs, and then write down the key control that, that's all the accounting language, right? But like key control, each of those what could go wrongs, and then you'll know that you have them. It kind of sounds like I don't know that this was it a lack of internal controls, or was it not following the controls we had in place? It sounds like a lack of.
I think it was a little bit of both. I do think, because there were training manuals that I had for the position on how to a report and that wasn't being followed, but, you know, we do have actual procedures and policies for those, but there are a lack of internal controls for other aspects. And I think that's the main area that I was concerned with, was there truly were no controls for some aspects of the reporting.
I mean, it seems like for a lot of entities, you can have a lot of processes, but processes aren't controls.
Right.
And, you know, if you write down your true what could go wrongs, and then you should have one key. I mean, you can have a lot of controls, but you should have one key
Right.
that makes sure that problem doesn't happen. And if you go through that exercise as a brainstorming, you know, event, and then sit down and document all that, then I think you'd have a really good start to know that you have all the controls that you need.
Sure.
Are we formalizing anything in policy? Yes or no?
I think that, I mean,
And that may be more of a David or Ad question than it is.
sure, but, I mean, to me, I mean, it's good to have something, again, to follow, to make sure that it's not just forgotten about.
I just remember state audits, and they would really like to see it written down on paper and formalized, passed by the board somewhere, probably not this body. but-
It all needs to be written down. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing I think, and I've asked for it in the past, but I haven't been able to communicate it very well, is that if we look at this monthly comparison chart that you give to the board, and I look at the 2022 actual, and I look at the 23 actual, and you look at each of the months, 23 is a lot higher than 22.
Right.
But when I look at the rest of the year, the forecast is flat. And that just logically doesn't make sense to me, that if we've got, and let's say $12 million to make the math easy, and that's $1 million a month, and if you spend $2 million in month one, that leaves you with, you know, 10 million left, and so the next month should not represent $1 million of budget, it should represent, you know, a 10 divided by 11, right? And it just continues to go down. But we look at this chart, and the bar chart is flat for the forecast for every month, showing that, you know, it's roughly at the same run rate. And if we're spending more, and if I look at July, I look at August, I look at September, you know, I look like it's higher.
Right.
So the forecast can't be the same mathematically for us to end up in the same place. So I'd really like to see, when we talk about board reporting, a more accurate representation of where we think we're headed. Because if we had done that on this chart, I think we could also see that total number would go down, right?
Sure.
For the forecast for what would be spent in those other areas.
Sure. Yeah, I think initially the forecast was set up as kind of a cap to kind of show if we split the budget out about 12 months, if we go over that, that's kind of over what the cap should be, you know, if we're looking at monthly cap for expenses. I think that's why that was initially set up, you know, however many years ago with that, you know, forecast budget or proposed budget.
But we're gonna have to change our forecast throughout the year, I think, is a master.
Correct.
Right.
We were just changing our actual.
I agree.
And not
Yeah,
that.
and I think, I'm not sure, honestly, I haven't looked at the chart for January, so I'm not sure if it is a flat one or if it's a forecast, but I do think that we did adjust for forecast. Again, I don't have the chart in front of me.
Right.
Yeah, so this is the September report, I guess, that we've got in here, or the
Okay.
first one I'm looking at, right? And you can just see that forecast is a flat line,
Right.
even though July, August, September are, you know, probably 15 to 20% higher than what, the previous year was. So I'd like to see a budget, that's good, that helps us, and I'd like to see an actual, that's good.
Sure.
But I'd like to see a forecast that's an accurate representation of, based on what
Sure.
we know now, what does the future look like?
Based on our burn rate, what do we have left, or what do we plan to do?
Right.
Sure.
well, I think the budget needs to be like budget to date, not just, here's the year's budget. You know, and we're in December, we should compare like where we were gonna be, you know.
Right.
I know the budget per month isn't gonna be perfect, you're sort of guessing, but it should be an educated guess.
I think that used to be one of the reports that we produced, was that basically what I was told when I came in, because I do remember last when I was here, that was one of the reports I had, was a budget per month.
Yeah.
And I do think that was done away with because they thought the financial packet was too large for the full board, is that correct? Okay, because we can obviously throw that back in, it's not a problem at all to do that.
I think more is more.
Okay.
More is more.
Okay.
part, so let's do that, right? I mean, I think that as much as we can kind of see that, and we'd love to see, like in the chart above that, you know, the forecast should end up at our,
Actual.
at our, yeah, at our budget and our actual there, so that does not show that we're trending higher. Or if it is trending higher, what are the actions? Like,
And there's nothing wrong with finance getting more reports than the full board. If we think that
yes.
if the full board doesn't need all of this, the full board is relying on finance to actually look at all this, so.
And Michael, that is correct for the full board, they wanted to reduce it.
Okay, just make sure why it wasn't being done, I don't know.
And then, Matt, if there's one thing that I could offer for the board's consideration that you might throw in with that forecasting is also tying that to the need of the workforce region. So what is the economic forecast? I mean, are we dealing with a situation where there's massive layoffs, or are we dealing with a situation where there's more required trainings, or are we dealing with rapid responses, or not? Because then, instead of just dividing by 12, where you're trying to, you know, track on the same burn rate, there could be years where you do want to accelerate spending, or there could be years where you want to hold back too. There could be years where you want to have more carryover, and there could be years where you don't want to have any carryover because the need is now. And I think, and I don't know how to do that. I'm just suggesting that as maybe, you know, a follow-on action that, you know, looking at the needs of the workforce region are also just as irrelevant part, or it is a relevant part of the budgeting forecast.
Right, I would agree. I think that as much as we can show, as long as our budget doesn't go over budget, it doesn't have to be a flat line just divided by the periods. If we know that there's a recession happening or other things and we anticipate that we may want to save more funds. So every month doesn't have to be the same. I agree, as much as we can represent that. But I do want that to update as the year goes on, and it doesn't look like it's updating, so. It
Yeah, I don't
doesn't
think
look like
that-
it's coming to a point, right,
Right.
where we're going to match it out.
I don't think the first half of the year, like you said, I'm pretty sure it looks like it was divided by 12 and just thrown in there, so, but that's something we can do.
And when, we'll get into what, I guess, some of the things that we're talking about, what's happening next and some of the impacts, but, one topic, I guess, for today, and maybe we can get through the rest of what we're gonna do and what we're gonna say, but we do need to talk about how we're talking to this at the board level and what everybody sort of understands.
Yeah, I mean, again, my simplest explanation was always just, you know, we didn't have adequate, you know, internal controls to make sure our budget was accurate. We gave an incorrect budget, that the carryover was miscalculated. And basically we overspent, you know, on that incorrect budget, you know, thinking that we had all this money when we didn't.
By staff that's not currently in this building.
Correct.
That's probably.
Yeah, I don't know, I mean, it doesn't sound like anybody was fired for cause, but it sounds like it's, or maybe they were, but it's more, we have better visibility now as you dig into it. All right, so let's talk through some of the impact then. You know, the simple one was, you know, is this like, what's left? I mean, can we do a joint board meeting where we cater lunch, or I mean, are we at that?
So with the joint board meeting, that will fall into next year after July.
Oh.
But, I mean, Robin's really good at making sure we get reduced rates on stuff, so like the facility, we think there's no charge, the lunches are only $10, and, you know, we just put out an RFP for a presenter, but, I mean.
We don't have to pay that this time?
Yeah, we don't have to pay that this time, and, you know, it could be, you know, $1,000, it could be $5,000. I mean, with the current situation, I would recommend we pay for somebody that's $5,000 to come in and do a joint training, where we could reevaluate and, you know, try to find somebody that doesn't want to come in.
So the federal requirement in law is just for the joint meeting, right?
For what?
There's not a federal requirement for a joint training, but there is a federal requirement that the two groups meet together, right? That's what the law says. So maybe we don't pay for a training this year, try to
Just
save
do a
some
joint
money,
meeting.
and just make sure we're compliant with the law and having the meeting.
Especially if the allocation's smaller, and you
Right.
get the more into October. Okay, that was just one I thought of. Are there, any other commitments? I'm just forgetting that
As
that was
far as
already next year.
commitments, I mean, none of us are going to any everything, that was scheduled for March. And then, we have gotten the list of all the events that are coming from our staff at the career centers, and either the board staff or the three, career center staff that are left will attend those events. But we're not scheduling any new events, between now and July 1.
We have a contractual obligation.
Just that,
So are we tracking, any incentive that's supposed to be paid to Equus, based on our contract, or are we budgeting for that and making sure that it's gonna be covered and all? Okay. Alright.
Michael's got it down to, kind of what is left now, depending on what the invoices that we get from Equus.
So lay of the land now is we laid off frontline staff.
We laid off 20 on Monday.
Who's we? I mean, like, were they ad staff,
They were
Equus staff?
Equus staff,
Okay.
but I don't consider, we're all one person.
But we have different fiscal responsibilities. I'm not saying we're not one team, I'm just trying to understand who they are.
But we laid off 20, folks, and we told them on Monday that Tuesday would be their last day. The president of Equus called me, Monday night and said that Equus is gonna pay for 30 more days. So their last day will be March the 23rd, and then they are gonna pay them their time. So, I'm confident, that most of them will be able to find employment. We've got a great staff at the career center, so, they will all find employment, and we're working too to help them find employment. And then as far as ad staff, there will be 3 ad staff that will have to be laid off.
We're looking at, so as far as what the workload's gonna look like over the next few months, are we basing what's that staying, what's going based on the type of work that needs to be done?
Those actions, okay.
And we didn't have a choice. For every day that we kept people on, that's thousands of dollars. And so we didn't have a choice but to go on and lay them off. It was just, obviously, like I said in the email, I wanted to be able to tell you all up front, before we told staff, but everything happened so fast that we had to go on and do it. So we have not laid off our staff, yet.
Do you have a timeline? I mean, I don't know what the internal budget looks like. I don't mean to talk about you guys while you're sitting in the room.
No, but also, I mean,
They're aware.
from our board responsibility, I want to be careful, I'm not stepping into HR of individual organizations. And you, Mike, you can keep me honest here, but just trying to understand what that is. And then, so sounds like as we start to ramp up in July again, we'll go on a little bit of trying to recover from that and bring people back as we can.
And I know, here with the ad, I know David is looking for opportunities for staff to go into other, potential positions, maybe community planning or something, during this time, if there's anything that would make it.
I don't want to get to HR either, but Matt's gonna have to report to the board what the budget and staffing looks like next week.
We're evaluating that every day, because the budget becomes more clear, but like Amy said, this happened on Monday. You have to take immediate actions to stop. Kind of analogies, when you walk in your house and your house is flooded, you don't walk around each faucet to see which one's dripping, you walk outside to the main water valve and shut it off. Then you figure out where the leak is.
Then you check each one.
So every day we're evaluating, what's available, what are the resources, what can we patch together to make things work, because ultimately the last option is to have to lay people off. Right.
Yeah.
So we're constantly reevaluating, how fast can we turn this around? How fast can we patch this? How fast can we get people back while maintaining the overall sustainability of the program long term?
No, I sincerely appreciate this, and this is gonna sound cold, and I hate it, but it's this board's responsibility is just to holding to the budget, so, and I appreciate all you're doing to do that, and again, I don't mean to sound cold there, it's just that.
It's reality.
Yeah, all right. Makes me a bad human being, it feels like one, but yeah, I'm there. So are there any other vendor communications or things we need to go through to, Leo Communications, Clio Communications, DOL Communications?
I've communicated with the Cleos, so they're aware of everything that's going on. Yesterday, I had a meeting, and most of the Leos were in that meeting and are aware of everything that's going on. There's no reporting to do to DOL or anything. As far as our training providers and our partners, that has all been communicated by us, by the direct service staff as to what's going on. So the people that are actually in training, who've already paid for their training, they can finish out this semester. It was the folks that were in like the internships that we had to replace out.
Okay. And at the end of this road, will we be over budget still, or?
That's something I'll have to look specifically compared to the workforce budget. That's a good question. I don't think, looking at January, that we probably would be, but again, I'll have to get back to you on that, and I'll make sure to email you, make sure what I'm seeing forecast wise. I wouldn't think so with the minimal expenditures we have the rest of the year forecasted. But again, I don't want to give you a firm answer. I'll go look that up. In the future, obviously, next year, because we essentially won't have any carryover, we will have to obviously operate on just a single year of allocation. So what that means is, yes, we can, hire staff back, but we would have a very restricted budget, in terms of services provided or to provide. And then basically, it's just, we're gonna slowly try and play catch up to get back to normal. I'm thinking 2-3 years before we have a full budget that we can work with, kind of how we were, 2 years ago.
Is the 3-year grant cycle exception policy from COVID done with now? We're back on a 2-year cycle?
Yes. Which again, may be helpful in our instance. I mean, that would be something that maybe we get more additional funds. So, yeah.
So maybe, and any other questions for folks on the phone? And I kind of want to go into what we're going to do in terms of reporting, or what I'd like to see from for the board meeting next week.
And sorry, man, I'm looking right now. There's no way that we'd be over budget on our workforce budget, just looking right now for the rest of the year. So we have a whole budget of 4.9 million. So we don't have the funds available to us, so we will not be over budget for FY23, for the workforce board.
With the changes that have been made.
With it, yeah. But even if we don't have enough money available to us to even reach that 4.9.
But I think what Matt was asking is, are we gonna overspend what we do have?
Oh, gotcha. No, not at all. No, that's because of the actions we've taken. No,
and then the only other one that gets weird is we have a certain requirement to maintain a certain percentage, I think, of so much of
youth experience.
Is that gonna be messed up?
We're fine there. Yeah.
We were way over to the positive.
Yeah. And also, every year that you actually go over, so if we had a requirement for FY22 work experience and we go over a certain amount, we can carry that to next year. So we're totally fine with work experience requirement. And then, the only other requirements we have really is youth as well, where it's like 75%, 25% out school versus in school. We never even come close to that, so that's fine as well.
Okay. So it sounds like we're compliant and all that.
Any questions from folks on the phone or anything to add?
Try to blast you guys with ambient noise, but I'm liking this conversation, Michael, Matt, and everybody that's getting this together. But for our board meeting, and Matt, I think you're alluding to this, a simple, clear message, and I think Michael was doing a good job of describing that, needs to be presented to the board in the board meeting. It doesn't confuse, the rest of the board. And I like the marching orders that's already presented, but whoever's going to speak on that, whether it's Matt, Michael, or a combination thereof, Michelle, maybe, whatever. That just needs to be a good, clear message to everyone else, so they're not a bunch of chaos questions that spur out of that meeting. So I think you guys are on the right path for that. But I do want to say I've got to get off here. I was getting ready to write a message. I've got to get off here in just a minute, but thank you guys.
Thanks,
John.
Thanks, Jimmy. Anyone else? All right, so I think I want for the board meeting next week, it sounds like what we're saying is, basically explain a little bit about what happens, or I can, you can, I mean, whatever, but it's a, you know, the carryover was the primary culprit that was misunderstood. I'm not using the right accounting term,
Sure.
but, we're putting more oversight in place, controls to make sure that that is an accurate number moving forward. However, unfortunately, that put us in a position where we are today, that we've had to slow down, stop services through the end of the year. We'll start ramping up again in July at a smaller scale until we get the full allocation. It'll be October roughly before we get back to full state.
I don't want to get too into the weeds as well, but like, for instance, our age or a youth grant, we typically get a allocation that we can actually incur expenses from April. So even though we don't get the allocation, like Amy says, a lot of times until July or August, that NFA typically, the start date is in April of the previous fiscal year. So we can incur expenses for that. That is another potential.
Yeah, I would say that that's good. I would.
And that's why I don't want to.
Like, I would say, like, I don't want to be like, hey, we might have money.
Right, exactly. That's why I just addressed that originally, but that is.
But if we could, you know, just say that as we're doing everything we can to maximize what we have left. I mean, that's probably as much as we want to dig into. And then you guys are taking all the right austerity measures, as painful as they are, to make sure that this stays compliant. The other thing I do want to say is that I've been really proud that we haven't for a long time said because of our history. But if we could say, you know, because of, like, I think it's really important for us to be able to say there wasn't a misappropriation of funds. I mean, that's not why we are, or there wasn't rogue spending or aggressive spending. It wasn't that we were buying all these extra Oculus things that are really cool and good, right, that drove us beyond this. It was, because I think that actually came off a grant anyway, right? But it didn't. But this idea that I mean, if we did anything.
I think you opened the meeting with the right question, which, first of all, we didn't do anything wrong, there was nothing illegal, there's no disallowed costs, there's nothing where, you know, we're gonna have lawyers sitting at the table at the board meeting next week, we're not gonna do anything. This was simply just an internal tracking and also a state tracking issue that compounded into a situation where we're at today.
Yeah, this was I don't know, perfect storm or rains and pours, whatever you say there, is that if the controls were in place in multiple levels, it wouldn't have happened, but it fell down multiple times in place. All right. I know the situation is very, very unfortunate, and I know the situation is very, very painful to lots of people, and I feel for that. But I also appreciate all the things that you guys are doing to make this work. So, what do you need as a finance committee then for this agenda? Just to agree to a path forward. There was like I don't know what we need to do.
Items to make you all aware of what was going on. We've taken all the actions I think that we need to, that we had to take.
I think any other subsequent actions are not the purview of the WIB or even this committee, it's gonna be to address that.
Okay. Well, any other questions on the phone or anybody else? And then otherwise we'll move on to the next agenda item. All right. do you want to go through, setting up on that sort of high fun note? Do you want to go through the finance reports for September through January?
I can. So we've got, I started in here in November, and I've produced the November, December, and the January reports since then, but as we can see in September, we are, you look at our charts and you can see that, we started out way ahead. Our admin was at 28% compared to 23 the year before. Adult was at 54% versus 17% the year before. Dislocated worker is at 30% as compared to 10% the year before. And then our youth was at 30% as compared with 8%. And so, and overall, we were at 31% versus 23% the year before. So, yeah, so there's in September.
Yeah, so just looking at that, I mean, now looking back, knowing what we know, I mean, we see, 3x, dislocated workers, 3x. There's a little bit of where anticipating that. And I know you're getting this under control now, but we're February and this is September, so that's, I think if we had reports closer to current date, that would have helped us. Okay.
Are we doing reconciliation any earlier so that we do have?
We close books now. I mean, that's something that should always happen, is close books, before the reports are due the 20th. And when I report to the executive board, that's it. That's their published finances. Nothing else should be hit after that. So yeah, we have everything closed for reporting.
Because I know a couple times in the past we didn't have, we changed meeting dates and stuff like that because we didn't have these reports.
We should be able to produce board reports for the workforce board at least by the 20th, the following month. So for this month, we'll have January, for instance. That'll always be the case.
Okay.
January's in here.
Yeah, awesome.
But as we move into October, we actually were at 43% expended overall versus 49% the year before. Admin was at 37% as compared to a lower 32 the year before in October. Adult, we were up to 80% compared to 64% the prior year. We're at dislocated worker was at 38% as compared with 29%, so a 9% increase. Then our youth was at 41% as compared to 31% the year before. So you see the increases are a little bit less in that one.
So the over rev is the goal.
Yeah, and this is for October, this is a cumulative, right? That takes us through.
Yes, it's cumulative beginning of July.
Oh, it is cumulative.
Yes.
Okay. So we're trending a little better than at this point. Okay.
Yes. Now in November, we were at 43% expended versus 35%. That's the overall budget. Our admin was at 45% versus 40%. Our adult expenditures was at 95%. And now I'm confused just for a moment. We were at 65% the prior year in October, but I'm showing here 61%. I might have to update that number just to get that straightened up. It should be 61%, it should be higher than 65, whatever it was. October, it was 65%. Must miss that. But the dislocated worker program was at 45% versus 41% the year prior. And then our youth was at 51% as compared to 33% the year prior, so an 18%
Yeah, and then I look at the chart for November where things are really close, and I feel like, okay, but we had a lot to make up for because we were significantly over in July, August, September, October, but it looked like November was the same as the prior year.
Yeah, November is when we kind of said, okay, everything needs to slow down because that's so far up.
Yeah, just in my head visually, that's where, I mean, I can see it there. where I
Yeah,
can-
where it changed.
Right, yeah, okay, thank you.
Through to December. In December, we were at 66% expended overall versus 51% the year prior. Our admin was at 57, up from 51 the year before. And then we saw our adult expenditures crossed 100% to 122% as compared with 88% the year prior. As you see, the year prior, we were almost fully expended at that point too, but we're trying to carry it a little bit. Yeah, we missed that. Dislocated worker was at 56% as compared with 40% the year prior, and then our youth was at 64 versus 50 the year prior.
Yeah, and just admit, but for December, we probably should have a forecast number in the chart.
Yeah, I left that in there just for I can start checking that out, but I left that in there just for, just to see what we had looked at the month prior, or whatever. That makes sense.
So we don't have an approved dislocated to adult transfer yet, right? You just said that they gave a
Right,
verbal.
it's just verbal.
So this will change, these percentages will change once that happens,
Correct.
correct?
We've
And we'll
submitted
get it back on
paperwork
track.
for this week.
Yeah, I know it's a little while, but I was just,
They're fighting it now.
one pal's just gone.
That's right.
And on that call with Rachel over there at the state, she's made it sound like it was a no-brainer,
Yeah.
It really sounded,
Well, it always should have been, the
it
law
was,
allows
it was
for
a
it up to
10-minute call,
The law allows for it up to 100%, and it should have been administrative action on that. Now, at least they're treating it as such.
All my talking points, and it was just a shocking, like, yeah, okay, just send it in. It's like,
Yeah, kids
all right.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were used to the old stuff. Yeah, I was ready to fight it out, but no, it was easy.
Good, that's good.
Well, and I think that goes to show just how much the staff and everybody, all the staff in here really worked with the state to build those relationships over the last 3 years. And I think this right here is a perfect example of what our staff have done to build those. And so that in a situation like this, the state supports us as opposed to battling with us or whatever like in years past. So I think it says a lot about our team.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
and Michael and I, we went and met because, part of their issues with the draws is like, well, your stuff isn't matching, in words with what we saw, And so we went over there and they looked at what we see, and they don't know how to advise us on a lot of things, like how to get the system to do what we want it to do. They don't see what we see, and so it was really good just to, between Tanya and Mike Harmon to sit in the same room, and they saw what we saw, and we saw what they see, and there wasn't like we all just kind of understood each other as we went, and and then they were admitting, what places where they, could do better, and it builds trust whenever you can admit, that you do have a fault that can be worked on
forward together,
sort of thing. Yeah. So I think we had a really productive meeting when we did that. It's especially helped me is I'm just trying to figure out the system that's so funky, but anyhow, that was a positive.
Just in staring at this right before I lose a thought, on this yearly projection, can you add a second y-axis to this? On the right, that would take you from 0 to 100% of budget?
Okay.
If that makes sense. I like the millions on the left, just because it's a nice frame of reference, but it'd be also really good to understand, you know, as a percentage where we could take that as 0 to 100%.
Yeah.
So then in January, what we've got is we're at 70% versus 61 the prior year. Our admin only climbed to 65 versus 62 the year prior. Our adult expenditures is at 123 versus 73 the year prior. And then our dislocated worker was at 59% as compared to a much higher 74% the year prior. And then youth climbed to 73 versus 66 the year prior.
Would it be beneficial, we're showing this 123% on adult, and I think that's good to really show the issue that you're gonna be discussing next week. Would it be beneficial to show what the percentages will look like once these transfers go through, or should we wait until they actually go through? And I know we're not anticipating any issue, but it might be a good frame of reference as a, hey, here's the issue, here's what the numbers look like.
Yeah.
This is what we're doing to rectify it. I think that's your preference, man.
No, I think that would be good. Again, I know this is hard, but as much as we can say that, correctly reflect that we are on or under budget is, you know, that's our charter. Yeah, because as I'm looking at the beyond January as well, these forecast projections are probably not representative of where we are, right? So, yeah. And that would probably help us. I don't know, like you say you get it on the 20th, that was like Monday or something. Is that right? Today's Wednesday.
Yeah.
Thursday. You're just flying by. But, would you anticipate showing February for next week's board meeting or not?
We should be able to. We wouldn't have that information, right, Michael?
No, you said, is it next week?
It's the first.
Yeah, we wouldn't be able to give the final.
For me, that's the right answer. I would not like to see new information that we hadn't reviewed just the week prior, that I have to go review. Not that you guys aren't great at explaining it, it's just. But if we could update this chart maybe then to show the forecast, because I think that's probably the visual that puts it all together. Right now, we're talking about not certainty and whatnot, but that actually would put it as a, like, okay, so you can see it kind of go.
Those lines should not be flip flops.
So add the chart, update the chart to show true forecast, and then for the note if transfers are approved, where we would stand.
That's up to Matt, that was just a suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, and I envision that like a stacked bar, say, or even if you have to manually draw a little line on the PowerPoint or something, just to kind of say that this will be made whole once this transfer goes through, but it's just not final. It doesn't sound like you guys have any doubt that it will happen, but.
And haven't for a long time now, but, you know, on the off chance, we don't want to say it's done. Like you could say, this is what we presented to the state, and that they've given a verbal, you know, maybe, we're waiting for the transfer to happen. Because, you know, dislocated worker percentage is gonna jump up, adults gonna come back down below that scary 100% line that we don't want to be above this early in the year.
All right. Canceling my 12 o'clock. All right. Anything else you want to kind of share on this, or Michelle, any questions on the detail, Micah, Dolly?
I think I'm good. Thank you all.
All right.
I'll make a motion to approve the report.
Yeah, let's make a motion to approve the report, if you would, with the update to forecast.
I'll make a motion to approve the report with the updated language that Matt discussed for next week's meeting.
If that's doable,
Yeah.
right? That's okay.
It's totally doable.
Right. All
I'll
right,
second.
do I have a second? Thank you. All in favor, raise hand, say aye. Yeah, great, thank you. All right, moving on, update on the projections question from the executive committee meeting. I've got your name next to that one too. Yes. Sure, I remember what that was.
I think it probably referenced what you were talking about with the, where we were over 122%. So I think all that's kind of an answer to the
Okay.
conversation.
Okay. All right. Then next, national dislocated worker.
Yeah, that's, we have the NEG National Disability Worker Grant that we received for COVID. It expires at the end of March. We've expended almost all the funds that were they gave us a little over $1 million for that, and so we utilized all those funds, but they were very specific. It was continued one more year from March of 22 to March of 23, but it was very specific on what we could use it on after they did that extension. It was just, you know, out any internships, you know, up to $20,000 and those types of things was all we could really use it on if there's that time. So, but it's just about gone. So anything left will go back to the state, which then of course will go back to the federal government because it's completely expired now.
And we almost expended all this, we're not turning it off for some.
And that was a difficult grant to expend because with the dislocated workers, we expected a lot of them to come in with COVID and we just didn't have them. I mean, it was the complete opposite happened in a situation where employers couldn't find people. So we just didn't have a large need for the dislocated worker funds after we got through COVID.
Just gonna knock on wood, as you say, we got through COVID. Yeah. Then next, BGWIB.
So we're in the process of applying for a National Dislocated Energy Grant for the bluegrass cap. You know, more than likely we'll receive the funds. We just have to determine exactly how much funds we need for this project, and it's based on how many people are actually going to probably seek training or need internships and those types of things, and making the determination on that. Robin has been helping me with that grant, and we've been looking at some of the numbers, the reports and things that David group has been working on. So as soon as we have all the final numbers and can give put a good number in the NEG grant, we'll submit that grant to the federal government. Sheila, who is the director in Western Kentucky, has been helping me with that a little bit, as we've never applied for this type of NEG grant before, and she has several times. So, so she has some DOL contacts that are going to help me through the process.
I remember a couple of years ago, the whole conversation where they were wanting to bring in more chemicals and things to the bone, and it just got
going up.
Yeah.
We're actually trying to build an airport there.
Oh. Yeah, okay.
There's about 1,800 people that are affected. Some will retire, some will go on other travel jobs. We just have to determine the ones that want to get help.
Jennifer, on the Isaiah house.
I can give an update on that. We received We have the 5-year grant with Isaiah House. The first year we received $74,000 to help individuals in recovery. And they asked that 50% of those funds go to individuals in the Isaiah House, the other 50% can go to anybody in recovery. This year, after they completed that first year, with all the contracts that they had, they lowered the amount. So this year we received $54,800 as opposed to the 74. And we put, I think there was 15 or 16 different internships with that program, and then we help folks with support services, identification, those types of things. I think we're, I don't think we have a whole lot of funds left. It's on the reports as far as how much is left with Isaiah House, and it goes through September, and there may be $1,000 or $2,000.
There's about a little over 2,000 left, and 1,000 is reserved for the admin.
Okay.
So
that's,
1,000 for
yeah,
programs.
so about $1,000 left for that, and then the next allocation for that will come until October of this year.
Any other topics for discussion? All right, do I have a motion then to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Charlie seconds. Okay. All in favor here? Yeah, great. We are adjourned.